Dwight, thank you. Appreciate you getting up, especially on a day when daylight savings time has thrown us all off.
Yes, I want to thank you for getting me out bright and early on first work day after daylight savings.
You even switched your date to accommodate Professor Gerwig Moore, and,
yes,
and so you got the lucky draw to be together. Let's talk first about how you decided to go to law school, how you decided to become a lawyer, and then in particular, I'd like you to talk about your choice to come to Mercer.
All right, I suspect, like most lawyers and most of you, there's a circuitous route to get to law school, and maybe a little bit of serendipity involved in getting ready for this presentation. I was thinking back, and I think in my youth, I wrestled, I boxed, I was a competitive fighter in Taekwondo and in Judo. I went to the Citadel and I became an airborne ranger, and I thought either I had serious anger management issues, or I really should make some money out of this chance, this direction that I have in getting into fights with people. But I did. I went to the Citadel on an Army scholarship. I was an Army brat. To go back a little bit further, we had traveled all over the world. My dad is a career soldier. I was in Columbus, Georgia at the time. When I graduated from high school, I went to 4 different high schools. I didn't really have any roots in any one particular place. And then I got an Army ROTC scholarship, and decided that if I was going to do that, I would want to become the best officer that I could become. And so I went to the Citadel, which I still think, if there's any, no offense to any VMI grads in here or anybody else, but they still put out very good officers there. And then I went into the infantry, and as I said, became an airborne ranger and did that for 4 years. And then I've said in part that if I had had any idea that Jimmy Carter was not going to get reelected, I would have been a career soldier. My dad was a career soldier. I certainly enjoyed it, but it just looked like at that particular time there was no, as I said, perhaps a bit arrogant in my youth, saying that was not the place for an ambitious person at that time, because it just didn't look like nothing was going to happen with the military. That turned out to be wrong. 8 or 10 years later, some of my classmates were at the right level as we started fighting all these wars in the Middle East or whatever. So I looked around, thought that I liked the intellectual appeal of the law, and started looking around at the possibilities of going to law school. And my last duty assignment was down at Fort Stewart, down in Hinesville. You're familiar with that. And when I started filling out applications to law school, I recalled that I had worked a construction job one summer in Columbus with a guy that was an undergraduate at Mercer and was going to go to law school. And I liked the guy, and he said good things about Mercer. And on that slender read, I decided that I would apply, and I applied to some national schools and later accepted, whatever. But I told Mercer that I would need financial assistance to get it, and lo and behold, I got a financial package here that made it interesting and worthwhile. And so came up the road from Hinesville to Macon with my bride of 1 year, I guess then, and we settled in here and have never looked back, never regretted it. Got terrific training here. Again, through serendipity, I did not know what direction I was going to go in the law. I just know I wanted to be the best lawyer that I could be, and so I approached my studies here the way that I approached my career in the Army. I was just going to go at it full steam and then see what happened. And I hope you all know that, I mean, the harder you work, the luckier you get, and certainly the more options you'll have as to which direction you want to go. If you don't work hard, you may not have the option. You're going to have to do something with your life and your career, but it might not be what you ultimately hope to do.
Were there particular experiences in law school, or particular classmates or professors that made a difference in what you did?
I just think Again, I never went to another law school, so I don't have anything else to compare to, but I have talked to many of my classmates. One guy, I remember a guy that went to NYU who said, says, you know how they say you're just a number at some of these big schools? He says, I wish I was a number at NYU. Those people have no idea who I am, whether I'm here or not or whatever, and yet I felt like we had, over the years, I stayed in contact with many of our professors. John Cole, I've said that I embarrass him sometimes by reminding him of things that he said in classrooms 30 years ago, but things that stick with you and that were helpful to me. Ethical guidelines from Leah Chanin, I thought were particularly helpful. Dick Creswell and I became friends. The other thing was, I had a 4-year gap where I had served in the Army before I came back to law school, and at that time Mercer was just ramping up. They just moved into this building. We had all these guys were relatively young guys, but Mike Sabbath, Dick Creswell, even John Cole was a little bit older, but those guys were about my age, so I really wasn't that scared of them. You have the Rayburg, I was scared of. You guys have ever heard about this guy we call the Death Ray? There I was, I said an airborne ranger, and you would still get a little scared, and a little Death Ray would turn his steely gaze at you and make you stand up. He was that old school, would make you stand up. So all those guys were there again, and I've often thought that it was a testament to Mercer how stable the faculty is. I mean, you've been here for many years. Lots of people know to come back and say, "Oh, to you, my son-in-law, you were in some of your classes, one of his favorite professors." So, very, very influential and just very helpful. Not only becoming a good lawyer, but I think to become a thoughtful lawyer. The relationship we've had with professors was very helpful.
You'll be happy to know you're the third of our guests to mention Professor Rayburg. Very
sorry, it's hard to
Death Ray, Stingray.
Yeah.
He was still here when I got here.
Yeah. There was one incident I just remember. There was a kid that had played. I think he played at NC State. I mean, when NC State had a really good basketball player, he'd gone to the Final Four, I think, when he was there. And he was a real big guy, but a real nice guy too, and a pretty good student. Somebody told me he may have become a judge later in Indiana or something. I heard, but he was called. And here's a guy that had to go to the free throw line, late in the game, yada yada with that and everything. And he stood up, and Professor Rayburg just couldn't speak. He was so frightened of Professor Rayburg. And another.
Well, if I remember correctly, you've spent your entire career at Kingsball.
I did.
Which is unusual now these days to spend your entire career at one law firm. Why don't we first have you do kind of a general overview of the kinds of work that you did, and then I want to ask you about the transition and the growth process. But let's give the students a feel for what it's like to do what you did at King & Spalding.
All right. Well, let's start with the easy thing. Is I was a commercial litigator. We were broken down into teams at the firm, and with the teams with being especially in kind of like what kind of work do you do. We have a tort litigation team, a white collar crime team that we refer to as special matters. Don't want to refer to it as white collar crime, I guess, because that would be bad. On the other hand, I always refer to them. They were special matters were to matters what Special Olympics were to Olympics. And I thought we had the really good work, and they had the special matters. But I didn't like that too much. But anyway, those were that. And then of course that's just on the litigation side. On the rest of the firm, and for many years we tried to keep a balance of 50-50 balance of litigation and transaction work. But a lot of things, the economy in general and the way the law practice has developed and everything like this, I would suspect right now that King & Spalding is probably 75% litigation, 25%, maybe 35-65, but somewhere in that, just because there's just litigation has continued to boom, whereas the transaction work has become more commoditized perhaps, therefore a premium law firm is not going to get as much of that business as they used to. So that's how you kind of get into these areas. I was always, I've got a short attention span or something, but I never wanted to get in where I was going to constantly keep doing the exact same kind of case. And I really feared that. I liked the tort work. It was very early on in my career, I would jump into those tort cases because it's a little more price sensitive than the commercial litigation work, and they would let younger lawyers get out, take depositions. I actually, I heard when I was being recruited at different law firms, everybody would say, you don't want to go with one of those large law firms. You're going to be a trial lawyer. You need to get out there, get up with us and try cases. Those guys never try cases. Well, I personally, I was first seat in 4 jury trials by the time I had been in King and Spalding for 3 years. Because I would seek out these cases, I would look for the opportunities, I would get in there and do them. And most of those early on were tort cases. But I didn't want to get pigeonholed in something. I just think I'd get bored with it if I did nothing but automotive cases or nothing but pharmaceutical cases and everything like this. And so, meanwhile, I had gotten, again, serendipity. You never know what happens. I got off of doing a lot of work for the Coca-Cola company and tried probably one of the biggest cases that they had ever had. Let's see, the preliminary on the class action went 6 weeks. We went back the next year and tried that class action for 3.5 months. Then the judge had a nervous breakdown. Then we literally drove this poor man to distraction. He removed himself from the case. We had to go back and retry the exact same case, 5.5 months. So for about a 6-year block of my life, I did nothing but work on essentially one big case for the Coca-Cola company. And I finished that, so obviously my tort work and everything had dried up. And I'd made partner in the meanwhile in here, and I looked around and I said, I've worked for one client, basically on one contract, one contract with their bottlers we've worked on for 6 years. So I stepped back and I said, is there any way I can't market this? There's nobody else has this contract. I said, well, wait a second. That was a franchise issue dealing with their bottlers, and it was in a broader sense, a distribution issue. How does a company distribute its product? And so I started writing on those subjects. I started marketing myself as an expert in this area, relatively narrow area. Lo and behold, if you pick a narrow enough area, you can be the expert. And sooner, better than later, work began to come into me directly. I began to do a lot of work in the franchise and distribution area. And once again, to my personal weakness of my lack of attention or short attention span, I was being thrown into different industries and businesses all the time. I did a lot of class actions for Home Depot, for Wendy's, USAA, the insurance company, in a strange thing that I got into with them for years. And of course, then when bottling issues would come up, the Coca-Cola company would look to me to do this. So maybe with not a whole lot of planning or direction, other than just knowing I love to be thrown into new businesses, new ideas all the time, kept you fresh, kept you looking at businesses in a different way. That ended up being my career, and I had no intention to stay at King and Spalding, stay at one firm one time, but I never, honestly, of course I was approached by headhunters and had interesting opportunities presented to me, but I would always come down to say, if I want to do this kind of work, then I can't find a better place to do it, because I just liked and respected the people that I worked with so much.
Let's talk about those first few years. I mean, you're fresh out of law school. You're at King and Spalding. You obviously you want to become a partner. You want to succeed. You want to do good work. What's the key to success as an associate at a big law firm? How do you manage that?
How do you distinguish yourself? I mean, I looked around, and they recruit extremely talented people and pleasant people too. I've never felt like it was backbiting. This kind of the story you hear, at least the dirty rush on big law firms. These are all very nice people, all wanting to succeed on their own terms, and not necessarily. I never felt that I was going to succeed at the expense of my friend or my classmate or whatever it was. But how do you distinguish yourself in that regard? I always thought it was somewhat helpful to me that I had been out and had been in another business, if you want to call that. You remember the old, what was it, Full Metal Jacket, the old movie that says our business is killing and our business is good. That was kind of, if I had been in another business, that was it. But I thought, I mean, like, there was another someone else who also ended up spending her entire career with King and Spalding. We were having lunch a couple years into this, and she said, 80% of what I hear everybody bitch about here, or in just being a lawyer in general, is just having a job. I mean, yeah, it is awful. You got to get up every morning and go in and work, and you got to go. It's just terrible. So do keep that in perspective. I mean, half of the bad things you have, and I know there's a great deal of dissatisfaction in the legal profession, but keep perspective on it. The vast majority of it is just a part of having a job and having that. So I think I had organizational skills and things that may have distinguished me from some of my friends that had gone right out of undergraduate, right into law school, and then right into a big law firm. I knew showing up 10 minutes early for the meeting with the partner, having the documents in a logical order that I could talk to him about, and then coming up with 3 options. This sounds like Army staff work to me. This is what how you would present problems to a senior officer, and word began to get around. This Davis guy has got something on the ball. He's doing things, and I also, again, you said something interesting. I knew that I wanted to be a successful lawyer. I did not know that I necessarily was going to be a successful lawyer at King and Spalding. But while I was there, I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could. And I did know that somewhere down the progression, there was going to be a distinction between lawyers who could try cases and lawyers who could not try cases. And I wanted to be in that group that could. So even though I was at a big law firm, doing civil litigation with the understandable rap that they don't try a lot of cases, I would always get on the teams that were going to try, and then begin to get that reputation that I could try cases, and then lo and behold, did that and followed that through with my career. I always I'd say this to recruits too at King and Spalding: take what I say with a grain of salt. I never practiced anywhere else. There may be other really terrific ways, to make a living and do what you do. I really enjoyed what I did, and if you, as the old cliche says, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, and there's some truth to that. And believe me, I worked some days in my life, and there's some things you just have to kind of hammer away at. But I did enjoy what I did, and therefore stayed out.
Well, part of the experience for, I think, most young lawyers in growing professionally is to have mentors. And could you talk a little bit about the people who were your mentors, what they did for you, and how they helped you along with it?
Yeah, I mean, there are 3 in particular, and 2 with extremely close ties to this law school. The head of the business, or the head of the management team, well, I guess at the time they called him the managing partner. When I started at King and Spalding, was Griffin Bell, who was a legend in his own time, a graduate of this law school, former Attorney General of the United States, former Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals judge, and just I would have to say probably one of 3 great men that I've met in my life, and I had the privilege of working very closely with him on a lot of things. He took a shining to me, and it had to do with my connection to Mercer, and he had heard that I was, he knew that I was a Mercer graduate, and then began to hear good things about me, and then got me involved in some of his cases. I tell this one anecdote that's, like most, it's got a grain of truth, but it is true, that I was, again, at Army training, I was always up early, and I went in, and I think, to make the full story, I think my daughter had a little soccer game at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, but in order to get all the work done, I had gotten down to the office at like 6:30 on Saturday morning. And at about 7:30 on a Saturday morning, Judge Bell, I think, was going to play golf or something. He had come by to pick up something in the office, and he stopped and he sees my lights on. He says, "David, what are you doing in here? You know, I said, Judge, I just got a lot of stuff I'm doing. And he said, well, you know, if you're smart enough, you really don't have to work this hard. You know, he kind of laughed and walked on. But that was the first conversation I had with him. And the next thing I know, I got a call from him that he was staffing up on one of his big things. You may remember the E.F. Hutton investigation was nationally prominent matter, and he got me involved in it. And I got to travel with him a lot and work with him a lot. I'll come back in just a second, but it really was an amazing opportunity. I got to work on some of the most high-profile things in the country, watch a truly brilliant lawyer work on problems, and also stay involved in the community. It's one of his big things was, he said, remember, as a lawyer, you're a service provider. You're providing services to your client, you're providing services to your community, and however you define your community. He ended up defining it as the United States of America, if not the world, but he was not quite that ambitious. But he wanted us involved in different things and gave me great opportunities to do that too. The other is a gentleman who not nearly as well known, but I hope that Mercerians know of him and will keep his memory alive, and that's Frank Jones. Frank Jones was from a fourth generation lawyer here in Macon, graduated from Mercer, went back to his, I guess, great-great-grandfather's firm, had been president of the state bar, later became president of the American College of Trial Lawyers, as had Judge Bell. But at an interesting time in his career, when he was like 55 years old, he succumbed to the lure of King and Spalding and moved up to King and Spalding and had been practicing there for 10 or 12 years, I guess, before I came in '82. But just a masterful trial lawyer and a very good mentor to me. And to see these two pillars, these giants, and they were good friends too. They liked each other. They got along great. But it was just so different. And I decided sometime along the time of working with Judge Bell that you could never learn to be Judge Bell. But I thought I could learn to be Frank Jones because he was very meticulous in how he would try cases and his attention to detail and all those things. I said, you know, watching Griffin Bell work was like watching lightning strike a tree. I mean, it is awesome. It is a hell of a thing to see. But knowing how to do that is just next to impossible. Whereas Frank could deceive you into believing you could learn to build a case the way he would do it and have these great insights into cases. And so, and he was the one that got me involved in that Coke case. And then the third person is Chilton Varner, who you may or may not have heard of, but she was such a great influence on me. Started me out working in those tort cases, and then we moved over together into that Coca-Cola case. Tried a lot of pharmaceutical cases and everything later. And again, I had not really thought about this, but all three of those people became presidents of the American College of Trial Lawyers, which is this group of a national organization where only 1% of all the lawyers in any state can be a member of this organization and everything. But all three of those people became the president of that organization, and I'm pleased to say that I was selected as a fellow of that organization.
And one of the things that I hope the students know, and if they don't know, I'm going to tell them, is that Frank Jones sat down and gave his oral history about 6-7 years ago. It's recorded. It's on Mercer's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So students would find it interesting to hear directly.
Highly recommend you take a look at that. I mean, you'll see a great man, a great person, and a great lawyer giving you his insights.
When we were chatting before we sat down this morning, you mentioned that you had gotten a phone call from a young lawyer recently about how to keep it fresh. So we're talking about transition here and acclimating to a lifetime doing this kind of work. And there was something about that question that you wanted to be sure to talk about.
Well, I did. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, you get lawsuits. I guess I did not know when I was graduating from law school, kind of what you're committing to when you're getting into this. And so let me give you some good news and bad news. The good news and bad news is people are going to come to you with their problems. that is really a great thing. I mean, and they're coming in part because you're better trained than they. You've got a skill set that you're going to learn here in law school. And let's face fact, in a lot of cases, that it's just because you're smart. You've been blessed with more intelligence than they, and you can help people with their problems. That's the good news. That's the great news about being a lawyer, and something I still take a great deal of pride in. The bad news is people are constantly bringing you their problems. You know, I mean, it's just awful. So this young lawyer, a guy that I've taken an interest in and stayed in touch with over the years, he actually bumped into me at an event, and he pulled me aside and he said, he's been out 9 years. And I was thinking back where I was after being out 9 years, and I probably felt the same way. And he just said, doesn't this just ever get you down? I mean, you know, the phone is not, you're in terror of one of two things. You're in terror the phone's going to ring again, or you're afraid the phone's never going to ring again. You know, it's either going to be a new piece of business or something else, and you already put it on this heavy pile of work that you're doing, or that you're never going to get any more work, you know, and then what am I going to do, you know? Oh my God, it's terrible. And I think he had just gone through a bad stretch where, you know, he had trials back, a trial had been continued, and that he was kind of going into a funk. After that, you'd gotten ready for a trial, and then all the other things he had put off to try to get ready for that trial were now pressing, and it was all bearing down on him. And so at first I gave him kind of, not a flippant answer, but kind of a superficial, yeah, man, it's tough. What can I say? It was tough. I did it for 30 years, and it will wear you out. It really will. Physically, you know, mentally, all of those things. But the more that I thought about it, I said, you know, I do want you to step back. You've got to step back from time to time and remind yourself that you are in a profession where you are helping people. And that is a high calling. And I hope that this is not too coarse, I don't think, but there is an old saying in the Army that I think has moved over a little bit into popular discourse, and it's a little bit coarse, but somebody will say, if you're really busy, somebody will say, I'm up to my ass in alligators. Everybody has heard that, right?
I think the students can handle that.
Yeah, I've heard that. But there's actually a little bit, there's actually a more interesting bit to that story. First of all, it's based on a true story, at least that's what I've heard, was a group, the Army had sent a group of engineers to Panama to start working on the Panama Canal, and their duty was to drain some swamps so they could begin to get roads in there to do what they were going to do. And so somebody sent a telegram to the head of the engineers saying, how's that project going? How's the swamp? And the response came back and said, when you're up to your ass in alligators, it's hard to remember you're here to drain the swamp. Okay, so think about what he was saying is, I'm fighting off problems all the time, and I've got to remind myself that I'm here to drain the swamp. And so that was the advice that I gave to that young lawyer. Step back from time to time and remind yourself that you are in a noble profession. You are helping people. People are coming to you because of your training and your experience, and you're going to try to help them. And that's a noble calling, and it's worth doing. But you do have to remind yourself, you know, from time to time that that's what you're doing.
I know another thing that particularly has concerned you from time to time is lawyers taking care of themselves and of each other, given the chronic stress and pressure that lawyers are under. Could you talk a little bit about where that comes from and what the students should know and be aware of?
Well, I think it is something that it's a bit of a downer, and sometimes I don't hate to bring it up, I just think I have to, but when I talk to young lawyers, young professionals, within the last 5 years now, I've had 3 friends, three associates or people with whom I'm associated. One extremely close friend, committed suicide. And you've got all the things you've always heard about. You're racked with guilt. Why didn't I see this? You know, why was that happening? And all 3 of those people were, by most outward appearances, were very successful. But once you start peeling back the layers and looking, you realize they all suffered from depression. And it just kind of got too great for them. They bear down. And so. Remember what I said a minute ago, the good news, bad news, people are bringing you your problems. I I mentioned Chilton Varner before. She and I had talked about this in a different context, but the most successful litigators, every successful litigator that I know, would have one characteristic, and that is they take their client's problem as their own. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times that I just could not sleep at night wrestling with this issue of how we're going to do this, what we're going to do. And I had nothing to do with getting that client in trouble. They'd never come to me for advice beforehand, but they're in trouble, and now I'm wrestling with this problem, and I'm having all of that. The bad news is, if you constantly take everybody else's problems as your own, you are going to be weighted down with problems. And how do you deal with it? What do you do? So I've resolved. I always say this to people: just go into this with your eyes open. More if you are going to be a good lawyer, a good litigator, and not just a litigator. If you're going to be a transaction lawyer, you've got to take your client's problems to heart and make them your own, and try to help them with that in mind. But also keep in mind that you can't so internalize this that you feel like you're the one that's burdened with these problems, and that life is awful and you can't do these things. So look out for yourself. Keep an eye out on your own emotional well-being and emotional health, and look out for each other. I mean, in one case, the one where my dear friend committed suicide, beat myself up. No, I just didn't see it coming. I didn't know that he was the life of the party. He's one of those funny guys, never meets a stranger, extremely successful lawyer, but I didn't know that he was battling depression. And he even had kind of the bipolar issue. He had decided that he could not operate at the top of his game if he was taking these certain sets of drugs, and he had stopped taking them, unbeknownst to any of us, and against all medical advice and everything like that, and it ended up killing him. And I wish we had known, stay in touch with his wife. We've commiserated about it many times. But if others had known about this condition, maybe we could have saved him. Maybe we could have done something. We could have assured him he did not need to stop taking these medicines in order to perform at the top of his game. And we could have done something about it. But look out for yourself and look out for each other, so I'll tell you, because our profession does it. Statistics will show you we have a higher incident of depression and a higher incident of suicide among lawyers.
I want to change the subject for a minute to something that's on the students' minds this morning. They had an assignment due about an hour ago that related in large part to the notion of civility, and in particular, incivility in litigation. In 30 years of doing commercial litigation, I suspect you encountered some lawyers who displayed uncivil conduct. Could you talk a little bit about what it is that you encountered, where you think that comes from, and then how did you deal with it?
A very interesting topic, and one that I'll confess, I don't know whether this is a character flaw or not, but I'll admit, early on in my career, I had to deal with a lawyer. When I was doing that tort work, by the way, and I don't know whether that attracts more people, because I remember I talked to a plaintiff's lawyer one time on a plane on the way back, and he said, unlike the business disputes, which, as I sometimes have kiddingly say, it was one group of millionaires fighting another group of millionaires over millions of dollars. I mean, how that can't be that important. But from a plaintiff lawyer's point of view, in a personal injury case, that he feels like I'm this person's last chance to have any decent life. Something horrible has happened to this person, and if I don't take care of them, then they're not going to get taken care of. And I never diminish that. That's a heck of a burden to have to take on. And if you think that the other side is represented by heartless, cruel, number crunching zombies, you are going to attack them in that way. You're going to have that approach. And so early on in my career, I had to deal with a plaintiff's lawyer, a relatively young plaintiff's lawyer, I might add also, who was just mean, aggressive, accusing me constantly of lying and hiding documents and everything like this. And all I remember watching was that effective? If it had been effective, in all candor, if you're going to zealously represent your clients, then maybe you ought to adopt that technique and constantly attack the other side personally and accuse them of misconduct and try to try the lawyer instead of your case. But guess what? It didn't move the ball 1 inch. We ended up settling that case, like 98% of all cases settled, and we settled it for the exact amount of money that we had predicted the case would be worth when we started working. So all of that fighting and him filing motions and accusing us of terrible, terrible things just didn't move the ball. So that's one thing I will tell you is it just is not an effective way to help your clients resolve a dispute. Some of the most successful lawyers here in Georgia, plaintiffs' lawyers, I'll mention Tommy Malone, a great graduate of this law school, and someone who's very generous to this law school. I'm asking anybody who's ever tried a case with Tommy Malone says he beat the fool out of me, but he beat me by outsmarting me, coming up with better ideas. It wasn't all these ugly things that you hear about the incident. Look, I vigorously defended my clients, and I don't do anything. If that bothers you, then maybe you don't need to be a litigator. Go do deals where everybody's happy and they're all wanting to try to figure out how much money they can make and everything like this. But I liked a good fight, and I took my responsibility to defend my clients vigorously, very, very seriously, and I did that. But there was no need to make that any more unpleasant than it had to be. I would,
Well, you were a boxer, you were a taekwondo, and all these things that you mentioned. How in the moment, right, when you are face to face and you have a lawyer who is behaving atrocious and aggressive, how in that moment do you discipline yourself not to give as good as you can?
Well, again, and it was part of that training is that if you ever got mad in a fight, you're going to lose it because you're not thinking clearly. You're not. I would try to convince myself you're not vigorously and zealously representing your client if you're going to allow yourself to get so angry that it's just me and this guy personally. Not to say it didn't happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I would chastise myself and say, if you're not thinking clearly, you're not doing your best job, and you just have to tell yourself to do that and back off, and take some comfort that again, in my experience, 30 years, 99.9% of the time, I never saw that overly aggressive behavior advance the client's interest. What it did, it just made us all spend more time and more money to get to a resolution that you were probably going to get to.
Did you ever have a client who instructed you or expected you to do something that you thought was improper?
Certainly had them suggest things.
Okay. How do you?
That you got to lay it out to them as to why that's short-sighted. And not the right thing to do.
If you could do it without violating your confidentiality, can you tell us the kind of thing you're talking about? What might be suggested?
Yeah.
I mean, I had one who suggested we have a bonfire of documents. So.
Oh no, I never had anybody do anything quite that.
He actually used the word bonfire.
No, I would have. You've got to. You'd have to explain. I hope you do. Explain to them. No, that. I'm trying to think because I did use this example one time. So maybe somebody was suggesting to me that this one line of inquiry, we could not turn over this one group of documents, and it was never going to come out. And I just said, let me just tell you, that is fatally flawed. It always comes out. And when it does come out, it's going to be much worse than whatever you were thinking was going to happen. Because now, as the cliche goes, the cover-up is worse than the original crime, So we're going to turn these over. We're going to put them in the proper context and kind of get it done. No, I was thinking more about that I had I just had a client that was dead set on having the most aggressive approach to everything that we could do. File motions for contempt on everything. File a lawsuit against a third party as a way to detract from, you know, attention on this. And then I would just have to just say, that's, you know, that's not a good idea. And I do recall it finally just saying, if you want to pursue that line if you want to pursue that approach, you need a different lawyer. And I don't say that I'm anything, I'm just saying, I'm not that kind of lawyer, and maybe there is another lawyer out there that would do that. And that caused them to back off, and then we kind of kept it in the middle of the road.
Well, and that leads to my next question, which was saying no to clients, and maybe even saying no to prospective clients, and I'm not the lawyer to tell you. That happens from time to time.
Listen, I always thought that was one of the many blessings that I had at working at a firm like King & Spalding is, look, we're hustling as hard as anybody else to try to get as much business as possible, but we absolutely had the authority and because of the leadership of Griffin Bell, we're encouraged to tell, no, we're not going to take that kind of work. I was approached by a guy one time that had been driven out of Florida, had moved his operation in Florida to Georgia because Florida's Unfair Business Practices Act claim stopped his business, and he had done enough research to know that Georgia's did not cover what he was doing, and he came and wanted to hire me. And I went to my practice leader at that time. I was a junior partner, and went to him and I said, "This is just really sleazy. I mean, it was just." And he said, "What are you in there talking to me? Don't take it. You know, what are you talking about? Don't take that." You know, so it's a blessing to be in that position.
It is.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something, going back to just one of your earlier answers, was specific, and I apologize, I didn't warn you I was going to ask you this, but I don't think it's hard at all. The students a few weeks ago worked through a scenario involving production of documents in a big case. And the issue was, you know, whether or not the plaintiff had actually requested them. And of course, the defense lawyers knew what they had, and they were comparing what the plaintiff had asked, but it wasn't exactly right.
Right. And
so you have to engage in some mental exercise of how are you going to read these requests. What's the proper approach to that if there is one? If there's an ambiguity in the request, you know you've got some documents that hurt your client. They are otherwise discoverable, but maybe they've been asked for and maybe they haven't.
It's got ripped from the headlines. Did you tell them any background of that? About you know the governor's office got into a dispute recently in litigation about that, and I advised them after the fact on that. And it's tough. I mean, it is a tough situation, and the reason it's tough is you start with the first rule of ethics or professionalism, I think, which is you are supposed to be your client's vigorous advocate. Some say zealous advocate, and I've heard some thoughtful people say zealous is too much. Maybe you should just be a vigorous defender or a advocate for your client. And if you're going to do that, you just say, in our system of adversaries facing off and resolving things, if my opponent makes a mistake, I do not have to tell them about it. I'm going to take care of my client and his or her interest or its interest, and let the other guy take for their interest. And so, if you know that there's some kind of smoking gun document, what I would normally advise my clients is sooner or later it's going to come out. Right now, let's take advantage of the fact that we have superior knowledge. The other side doesn't have it yet. But let's not go forward with the assumption it's never going to come out. So the only thing, has it given us a window in which we can take advantage of the fact that we know something that the other side doesn't know yet. And encourage the client to, what would that normally be from our side, is let's settle this thing. We just try to settle it at a lower amount, and you would try to do that. I think that I am vigorously defending my client's interest by doing that, and I've done nothing illegal, immoral, or unethical. Now, that doesn't happen, and information and a request come in. You have to look at what they asked for and decide, did they ask for it or not? And even if it's the smoking gun and you know that it's terrible, I had advised after the fact that they would take the position that there was nothing unethical about that. I know a lot of people disagreed with me on that, and others. But in that particular, under those circumstances, that factual, I don't have to guess what it is that I think the other side really wants or needs. They're supposed to ask me for it, and if they didn't ask for it, I wasn't going to produce it.
And if they ask for it, you give it to them.
Absolutely, without question,
That's-
without
that's
question.
that, yeah. Well, I'd like to turn this over to the students, but first I want to invite you, if you've got any more advice, anything you want to say to the students that you haven't had a chance to say that you think they want to hear, I invite you to do that.
Well, I guess I was thinking about this when we had an old partner at King and Spalding who would always organize our weekly meetings, and in the spring of the year, the new crop of lawyers were coming in, and the summer associates were coming in, and this guy would say, "Ah, God, I look out on all these young, fresh faces. God, I wish I could do it all over again." And I used to sit there with my cup of coffee saying, "That guy is nuts." Oh my God, I got 3 phone calls are waiting on me back upstairs. I got to fly to Dallas tonight and won't see my family. Yeah, what? I don't want to do it. But of course, he was older than I was at that time, and now I'm older, and I look out at these young, fresh faces, and I do wish I could do it all over again. Just think about it. I mean, once again, people are going to come to you with their problems. That's a good calling. As you're in a learned profession. You have ethics. And it's not an oxymoron to talk about legal ethics. We do have legal ethics when 90% of other professions do not have it. And you can make a real difference in your community, and that I just don't think another profession has. A CEO, his duty is to make as much money for the shareholders as he or she can, whereas a lawyer, that is not your highest call. It's not to make the most money you can for yourself. It is to help your clients in the best way you can, help your community in the best way you can, make a difference in society. And your training and inclination all gives you those opportunities, and I hope you'll take advantage of it.
Let's see what questions the students have. Yes, ma'am.
So I've often heard that, when you work at a big firm, you eat, sleep, breathe, and live your work. So I would presume that would leave you with, I guess, less time for family and friends. So how would you say, if that's true, that you managed that?
Again, remember what I said about take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I've never practiced anywhere else. I don't know. I mean, I looked around at people that took other career choices within the profession, and it seemed to me like they worked awfully hard too. They were just as worried about getting the next client or the next matter as I was, and maybe it's just a degree. As I said, I didn't know any other way to do it. I wanted to do this as hard as I could and be the best lawyer that I could be, and I think with my personality type, I would have been that way no matter where. If I had gone to a public defender's office, I would have probably ended up, if not more so, because now I know people's lives are on the line, and I'm going to do that. I'll speak very, hopefully bluntly with you, but I actually had to look at this one time for our firm. I was blessed in that we were a two-parent household, and then my wife was in a position, and we knew we were making a financial sacrifice, and it was hard, but we had 2 kids relatively young. We had a child while I was here in law school, actually. And we just swallowed hard, and Brenda was not going to work, and she would take care of the kids and support me in a way that I could have a happy home life and 2 terrific kids, and it did. Now, I say that, do not mean that in any sexist way, because I also we look back at the firm one time, and to see our most successful female partners also had a husband who was either in a position who was making so much damn money that they could get round the clock support, or they were stay-at-home spouses. So it just seems to us it is very difficult to try to do it full bore all the time, just with one person engaged in doing it. Did I know that I was making sacrifices? Yes, but I thought it was a balance. I thought that the fact that I don't know if it makes any difference, that it bothered me that I was gone a lot, particularly when I was young and trying cases out of town 3 months, 6 months, what we were doing. But I would, go into work earlier so I could go to that soccer game on a Saturday. I would make those kind of trade-offs. I do not for 1 minute think that I figured out the right balance. It was tough. I mean, it's tough, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat that for you. You do it, but keep trying. Do try. The most unhappy people are the ones that seem to me just give up and just say, no, I'm just going to be a workaholic. I'm not going to do anything. Or the one that is frustrated in their career because they say, I really want to be the coach of my kids' soccer. I never was able to be a coach. I just didn't know that I could be here for 9 straight weeks or something. And so, but do try, keep trying.
Other questions you have?
Okay, so you mentioned that when you came to law school, you didn't quite know what you were getting into. So, what did you think, like at the beginning, as a 1L, what your career would be like compared to the reality of what it became?
Where it ended up. That's a good question. I would say if you had put me under sodium pentothal, I thought what I was going to do was I was going to come here, I was going to be as good a law student as I could be. I would become an assistant DA, I would become a DA, I would run for Congress, and I was going to become a senator. From the time I was like 16, 18 years old, I started making decisions that would put me in a position that if I wanted to do that, that was the direction. I thought I could do a lot of good for people if I did that. Now, how I got off track of that, I would say even when I was at King & Spalding as a junior associate, I was saving more money. We lived very modestly because I always wanted to try to have the financial flexibility that if I wanted to do that, I could do it. And somewhere in being up to my ass in alligators, I forgot that I was there to drain the swamp, and I just stayed with commercial litigation. So again, I would. The reason I highlight that and am glad to answer that question is, no matter what you think you might want to do, be open to other opportunities and think. You never know. I enjoyed what I did, but I never ran for elected office, which I always regret.
Do you want to make an announcement this morning?
Yes. Not in light of what I'm seeing in politics.
Other questions?
Okay.
You said that you kind of take people's problems as your own and you worry about them. Do you have any tips or techniques that you use to kind of help you not let that overcome you and not get overstressed from that?
Well, I tried to have outside interest. I ran a lot, believe it or not, in my when I was young. Bill Duffy, who's a federal judge now in Atlanta, he and I would run 1 marathon a year, and we'd go and make that a trip. We'd go someplace and run, and that helps. Now, my wife would always say, as soon as I would come in for my morning run, I would immediately run to the dictaphone and start writing, dictating ideas that I had while I was running. So I don't know if it was relaxing as much as I thought it was or not. I did follow Judge Bell's advice in staying involved in my community, whereas I didn't run for public office. I was always very active in politics and supporting candidates, working with them on their platforms or whatever, and that kind of helped. And the other thing is I would give myself this advice, and I certainly would give it to anybody that was working with me, and this gets to these kind of ethical issues, sometimes about having to make, are you going to produce the documents that have been called for, or are you going to try to hide something? If you find that you are wanting to win this case so badly that you would try to change the facts or hide the law, you've got to take a step back and say, I'm supposed to do the best that I can for my client who through no fault of mine, got themselves in this position, following the rules of our profession. And I'm not going to compromise my personal integrity just because they had a moral lapse at some point and have gotten themselves in a problem. But I do think lawyers get in trouble that way a lot of times because they have taken this problem, their client's problem, to heart so much that they will actually bend the rules or try to change the facts in a way that compromises their own integrity. Just don't do that. Don't do that. Yes.
With the military being such a big part of your life when you were younger, when you were in law school, did you ever consider going back into the Army and joining the JAG Corps?
Very good question. If everybody could hear that, did I consider going back into JAG? First off, if anybody's considering that, I would highly recommend that you explore that. I just mentioned my good friend, federal judge Bill Duffy, was a partner of mine at King and Spalding. But when he graduated from law school, he'd gotten a deferment on his ROTC scholarship to go to law school, and then he went into the JAG officer, and he got terrific experience. You're going to get more. You'll get thrown into very interesting problems very early. As a young lawyer, you'll have more trial experiences than you would even if you become an assistant DA or assistant U.S. attorney. So that's all good. I will admit to the fault of pride here, in that I had been an airborne ranger officer, and I just couldn't see myself going into the Army as a support soldier, which is what JAG is. And again, that was just because of my background and everything. So no, I did not consider it. I considered FBI. I thought that the FBI, at one point the FBI would only hire you if you had a law degree or accounting. Back in '82, they still had those rules, and I thought that might have been something that would have interested me, and again, was not inconsistent with my thoughts about later running for public office. But again, I didn't pursue it. But if anybody is considering JAG, do consider that. It's a very worthwhile call.
Time for maybe one more? Well, you said you would do it all again. How's retirement?
pretty cool too. As I say, we were just talking about that. The one thing that, again, my financial planning and the success that I had with a successful law firm allows you to. It's not leisure. It's not just to not do anything, but it's to do what you want to do. You know, and working on this pecan farm is really a great thing. Whereas everything that I did as a lawyer seemed so ephemeral. You know, as soon as one case was over, you'd have to go on to the next. We started this pecan farm 4 years ago, and now have 25-foot trees. We think we're going to have our first crop that's coming up, and that orchard will probably be there operating for another 100 years. You know? So it's been fun doing that.
I hope you can stay for a few minutes. I know some students will want to come up and
Please do.
introduce themselves. But join me in thanking Dwight.